Maria, welcome to Changing Tracks. How happy I am to have you here, close to me. Well, here today we have Sister. I'm going to read it because if not, you already know my pronunciation is terrible. Mary Gianna. I think I said it well. How's it going?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. So tell us a little bit about your childhood, your adolescence. Did you grow up in a Catholic family?
Yes. Thank you, Christina. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and I grew up in a strongly Catholic family, which I'm very grateful for. Sunday Mass was always a priority for us. And my parents, it was beautiful to see them in their marriage because they showed me what a holy marriage is like, which doesn't mean it was perfect, but I got to see them forgive each other. I got to see them be patient with themselves and with each other. And then that marriage then was reflected in their love for us. So I saw the love of my Heavenly Father in my parents. So then I was able to love my siblings with that same kind of love. And it was just a very happy environment. They gave us a lot of happy memories. And we loved being together. And family prayer was also important. And there was a time though where, as we were growing up, it was more just, praying before meals, praying before we went to bed, and going to Sunday Mass. And we did have a Catholic atmosphere in the house, so we had crucifixes and pictures of Our Lady. But as time went on, that began to deepen. Like I saw kind of an ongoing conversion in my own family, especially when my mom, I went to a retreat, and the priest there invited her to start the family rosary. And so when she started the family rosary, it was a little bit difficult because not all of us were into the rosary, and we all had our homework to do, we had our sporting events, TV, but my mom would try to gather us together. And when she did that, it would start out very small, just a decade every day, whoever she could round up. But she persevered. So we kept doing that for, that's when I was in high school. And as time went on, we increased it to a decade, or a full rosary every week. And then she got the idea to do a rosary every day. And so she built up to it and kept having us go back to the rosary every day. And as time went on, I think I really saw this love for the faith come out in my family even more. And it became something that was more my own. It wasn't just something that I did just because everyone else was doing it. And around this time, I also was a freshman in high school, and my mom invited me to go to adoration. Actually, it wasn't even exposition. It was just visiting the Blessed Sacrament in my high school, where I went to school. And so she said, before I pick you up from school, just go in and make a visit. So I was kind of reluctant to do that. But when I actually went in and gave that time to the Lord, just a few minutes, and I did that every day, then something started to change in me.
When you went to adoration, did you know what to do there? Or did you say to yourself, what am I doing here? I don't know what to do.
Well, at first I was doing it just because my mom told me to, so I was not too happy about it. And it was a very short visit. I didn't really understand it well. I knew that I was told that the Eucharist was our Lord, and I knew that. I believed that. But it was it wasn't really reaching into like the core of my heart. But as time went on, I found myself actually wanting to go and spend time with our Lord. And it was a sense of my faith deepening, that He was really revealing Himself to me there and helping me to know that was really Him in that tabernacle, and that He was God, and He was inviting me into this friendship with Him. And so then I started to go on my own and make extra visits and just to share with Him what was going on in my life. If I had a big test I was worried about, or a sporting event or a friendship problem, I would just take it to Him. So this relationship was developing with the Lord, and it was all His grace, because it was almost just imperceptible, very gradual, nothing big and dramatic, but just my affections were, I don't know, just gravitating more towards Him. And so then I started to want to go to Mass more often, and just my interest in reading the scriptures, my interest in the lives of the saints, and just knowing what was happening in the church. all those things started to just grow, and that was kind of, you know, planting all those seeds for my vocation.
You've talked about sports, about friends. Did you have good Catholic friends, or did the environment that you lived in help you to live that way?
That's a good question. Well, in high school, I actually had my friendships weren't really based on the Lord. I had friends that we had a great time together, and we had solid friendships, but they weren't my friends that I could say, you know, hey, let's go make a holy hour together. You know, they might have not been up for that. But as I went into college, that's when I started to really surround myself with people that were feeling the same way I was about the Lord, and really wanted to make their faith the center of their lives. And that was really important, because at that point I was discerning a vocation, a religious vocation, and I met for the first time other young people who were thinking about the same thing. And whereas before I felt kind of alone in my discernment, but then when I could see other people who were feeling that same attraction to the Lord and wanting to give their lives to Him, it was very encouraging for me. And so my friendships started to be based on the Lord, and we could actually pray together and go to Mass together and still have fun.
You mentioned the calling of the Lord. When did you start to feel that, or in what way was it?
Well, I can't pinpoint an exact moment when I just kind of knew I was called to be a sister. It was more this sense of, over time, like falling in love almost. This almost a capturing of my heart. Like I feel like the Lord was saying, I want you to be mine. And so I didn't really connect that with being a sister at first. I just knew that I loved God and I wanted to give my life to Him. So that was more in high school. But then once I got to college, I started actually meet sisters. And so I could see that there was a vocation that went with what I was feeling. And I could see young women who were in love with God and were living in convents, wearing habits. And I was like, wow, I think I really could see myself being happy in this life. And so it was through that time of prayer, and then eventually meeting sisters. Like I went on a nun run, visiting different convents, and that's kind of gave me an exposure and increased my desire for the religious life, even though I still had to discern where God was calling.
You mentioned the falling in love with Jesus, with God. Let's see, that terminology can, I don't know, make certain people feel uncomfortable. How does that happen in your life? I mean, how did you fall in love with the Lord?
Well, you're right, Christina, because all Christians are called to love God with their whole being. That's, you know, the most basic commandment. But the way that you're called to love God with your whole being it can be different. So like a person who gets married, they love God with their spouse, and they go to God with their spouse. And they have to be centered on their love for God in order to really give themselves to each other. And then in this vocation, in your love for God, you're actually called to be His spouse. So it's kind of a little anticipation of heaven, whereas marriage, you can see in a husband and wife, our union with God that we will all have in heaven. And we kind of start that here on earth with our religious vocation and being able to be a bride of Christ. And I think as you go through your discernment, you kind of get a sense for, how is God calling me to love Him completely? Is it through an earthly spouse, or is it more directly Him alone?
Okay, so listening to you, I understand that your family had a lot to do with your vocation, with small things like you were saying, like the Rosary, praying as a family. What advice would you give to those people who say, there isn't any time for this? What would you say to them?
I think my advice would be to start small, because it's true you don't want to give your family a distaste for prayer. So it's more of an invitation. But if you start small, for example, my mom started with a decade of the Rosary, which really doesn't take more than 3 minutes. And we already had been praying somewhat as a family, so it wasn't totally foreign. But taking those little steps, she was able to increase it gradually. And so it's more of a gentle draw into prayer, rather than just all of a sudden, you know, your whole life is interrupted by this prayer. So that it gives it time for you to grow accustomed to it and to actually see oh, you know, this is actually a good thing, and actually kind of desire it. So it kind of opens the door slowly. But also don't give up. My mom could have easily gotten discouraged and said, this is not worth it. No one seems to be interested. But I think Our Lady gave her the grace to persevere in it. And it has paid off, because we received a lot of graces for our vocation from that. I think, and as teachers, we're always reaching out to the parents and encouraging them, because they are the primary educators of their children. They're the primary examples of their children, and the models that they're going to look up to. So when they see their parents praying together as spouses, that has a powerful influence on children. And when the parents make it a priority to go to Sunday Mass as a family, to pray together, just to live a virtuous life and surround yourself with good influences, all those things are helping to form that rich soil that vocations can really grow in. Because in that environment, my parents, when I was able to share the call with them, it wasn't a total shock to them, because they had been, whether they knew it or not, leading me on this path and helping me to discover that vocation.
How did you find out that your vocation was with the Dominicans? After going on that nun run, how did you discover it?
Yes, that's a good question. I visited several convents at that point, and I was very much attracted to the sisters' life, their life of prayer, their life of community, their life of service to the church, and all those things were very desirable, but I really felt like it wasn't the specific charism. I didn't see that I was called to. And so when I was at a World Youth Day, actually, in Cologne, Germany, I met a seminarian who has a sister in our community, and he recommended that I come on a retreat when I told him I was discerning a vocation. And so it wasn't really until I came to our sister's convent, our mother house is in Nashville, and saw the Dominican life being lived. That was my first exposure to Dominicans, and I could see the charism of, well, obviously prayer and the Eucharist were at the center, their love for Our Lady, their apostolate for preaching the truth really appealed to me, because I feel like our world is in such need of that truth. And so I saw that alive in the sisters and the priest who was giving the retreat, and something in me kind of resonated, like, I think the Lord's been preparing me for this specific charism. So it's almost a call within a call to know where you're called.
Was it hard for you? I mean, because you said you were a young girl, you had said, I have to leave everything, and now what? What is the Lord going to want from me? Where am I going to end up?
Yes. I think one of the hardest parts was leaving my family, because we were so close. I wasn't really engaged in a career or anything that I had to kind of pull myself out of. I was at a natural transition point in my life because I was graduating from college. And so the timing of that just naturally opened itself to, I felt more free to pursue a vocation. But the idea of leaving the world was scary, you know, because this life is pretty radical. And you know, that you wear something that's not typical. I mean, you leave behind everything that you have. There are limits on when you can see your family, because the Lord says, you know, that we have to be willing to give all that up, even our loved ones, to follow Him. And so that was a real cross. And also just kind of the fear of the unknown. I didn't know what I was getting into. I could see certain things when I would visit, but you can never tell until you're actually there what it's going to be like. And I would think, what if I'm not happy? What if it's not what I thought it would be? But that's all part of the faith. You have to trust the Lord and take that leap of faith, and He will help you to know if that's what is really going to make you happy because it's His will, or if that's somehow part of the journey to discovering your vocation that might be to the married life. Or so.
And your family? You mentioned it was hard to leave behind your family. How did they react afterwards? How did they take it?
Well, even though they had raised me with the love of the Lord, and that that was one of their goals, was for my holiness and my happiness. That doesn't make it easier to actually let your child go off to religious life, because the closer you are to them, the harder it can be to let go. And so it was definitely not easy for them. But I think one of the things that helped them the most was knowing that I was happy. They could see that that I wasn't just jumping into something, that this had been gradually a desire that had been growing in me for a while. They could see how my life was changing and kind of gravitating towards the Lord and to this vocation. And they could see that that's what brought me joy. That's what got me excited, when I could serve the Lord and be with Him. And once they, allowed me to enter the convent, and they could see that happiness was still there and was growing, that helped them tremendously. My parents had always given me and my siblings a real freedom too, to pursue whatever God was calling us to use and cultivate our gifts and talents. So they always, they never tried to force us into anything, because they wanted us to be free to be who God wanted. And so they allowed me to do that, even though it was difficult.
How many siblings do you have?
So I'm the oldest of 4, and my brother is a year younger than me. And when I was kind of going through this process of discerning my vocation in high school, I didn't realize that the Lord was really working on his heart too. He didn't show it as much as I did, but when I was in college, I was a senior and he was a junior, he called me up at school and said, I broke up with my girlfriend, and I think God's calling me to be a priest. And I was pretty shocked. But then as I look back on it, I see the grace of God had been at work in him, and he had been going through this gradual conversion. He had been kind of a wild child. He never got into bad stuff, but he was just very free-spirited, loved rock music, always wanted to be, record his own music, played the guitar, and I was just praying for him and knowing that God had a beautiful plan for him, but it wasn't the priesthood. I didn't think it was. But now that he has entered the seminary, and I've seen that the Lord has taken all the goodness in him, that passion that he had, and really channeled it to Christ and to the church. I have seen him really blossom and flower into this very zealous seminarian. He's the Legionary of Christ, and he's studying in Rome. He's studying theology, so hopefully he'll be ordained in 2017. But we actually entered the convent. I entered the convent, he entered the seminary the same year. So that added another element of difficulty for my parents, because 2 of the 4 of us were entering religious life. But then it's been such a source of grace, because I know that he's praying for me and I'm praying for him, and the spiritual motherhood that's involved in our vocation that we apply to the people that we're serving every day, to our students that we teach. In a very real way, the Lord is asking me to have that spiritual heart, mother's heart for my brother. And then he, in turn, is really praying and sacrificing for my vocation, which is a huge source of strength.
Some difficulties that the young people find are their parents for their reluctance towards the religious life. What would you say to those parents?
I would say to the parents, first of all, validate that yes, this is a sacrifice, because the Lord himself said it. If whoever wants to follow me has to leave their father, their mother, their son or their daughter, so it's a sacrifice on both ends. And it is going to be hard in many ways, but I think the thing to keep in mind is that when you gave your child to God at baptism, you were consecrating that child to God, and so that child belongs to God even more than to you, and that child is loved by God even more than you can love that child, and his will for him or her is going to help that child to be the full person that they were created to be, to reach their full potential and to be the happiest that they can be on this life on earth. And no parent would want to get in the way of their children's happiness, but would want to do everything they can to increase it. So staying very close to the Lord in prayer through the difficulty of letting your child go is very critical, and talking with other parents who have experienced the same thing. And then patience. It just takes time. It took my parents a long time to just adjust to the fact that I wasn't going to be there all the time. But as things kind of settle in with the grace of God, then you can start to see some of the fruits of the hundredfold gift that the Lord promises, because that really is real. And you can start to even to see and experience some of that.
There are people who find themselves in this position, in this situation, that have a vocation, and their parents, however, are against it, and they distance themselves. What would you say to those parents? What would you say to them?
I would say, first of all, be very patient with your parents. Know that they love you very much, and it could be that the reason that they're against it is because they want you to be happy, but they don't see how you could be happy. So they're coming to terms with this, and to remember that it's a vocation that God has given you. God is calling you to enter the convent, but He's not calling them. So they don't quite understand that call. They don't understand that you actually want to do this radical thing with your life that's very much against what the world considers to be successful. And it could be a big surprise to your parents if they've had dreams of you doing this or that, having your own family. It can be a real shock because most parents aren't thinking about their children entering the convent. So being patient with them, really praying for the grace of acceptance, praying for the grace to know how to share that with them, and then just really trusting that the Lord will help them, because you can't change their mind about it. Only the Lord can, with time, help them to come to terms with it, to accept it, and even to see the beauty of it.
What is it that the Lord says to you in a determined moment to continue?
I think because my prayer life and my knowledge of the Lord really happens before the Blessed Sacrament, I think it's when I go before Him again, that's where I'm continually renewed. When I feel myself starting to get just tired or getting a little off track, I have to go before Him in my weakness and just really rest in His sacred heart, be honest before Him, and be renewed and refilled with His grace for whatever difficulty I'm going through, whatever particular cross or purification that I'm encountering. That's all part of His plan for our sanctification. And also Our Lady, she has been such a help for me, really growing in my relationship with my mother, and I see how the Lord has specifically told me, behold your mother. Like, I'm giving her to you to help you in all of your trials, to say her fiat that she had to say when she was at the foot of the cross, so that she can help you to be a faithful apostle and a mother of the church like she was.
You mentioned before spiritual maternity. Well, surely there are people who have never heard this in their life. Would you be able to explain it a little bit better?
Sure. Okay, so we're familiar with motherhood because we have mothers, and we see that mothers have children and they give life, and they have hearts that love. And that same kind of maternity, sisters are called to have too. It's not a biological maternity. We won't have our own children that have our genes, but we are called to give life spiritually, to really, out of our union, our spousal union with Christ, to really give birth to divine life in souls. And it's a lot more invisible, so it takes a lot of faith to really believe that the Lord is bringing that fruit out of our vocation. But He is, and that will remain in the mystery of God. But we do see that in the relationships that we have with the people that we serve, that hopefully our vocation really allows people to see the maternity and the tenderness of the church.
Do you think apostolate is important? And how do you think this affects the spirituality of each person? Because there are people that don't.
The apostolate? Well, for our life, because we live a contemplative and apostolic life, you can see how the two need each other. So we give a priority to our prayer life, and that's the basis from which everything else flows. But just like Christ was deeply united to the Father in an intimate prayer life, he also then went out to the people. So everything that he would discuss with the Father and his knowledge of the Father's will translated into his action, his desire to save souls. And so he was very much with the people, healing and preaching. And so each community has a specific way to fulfill that mission for the salvation of souls, to help people in a temporal way, in a bodily way, just like Christ reached out to the poor and the sick, and to also help those who are in need of him in a spiritual way, whether they were in need of the truth, in need of spiritual healing when he cast out the devil. So in all levels of our being, we're in need. And the church continues the work of Christ in the world. And so our mission as sisters is to do the work that Christ began. And that shows itself in a variety of apostolates. But without the apostolate, our life could be not bearing the fruit that's really conceived in our prayer and our relationship with Christ.
Well, Sister Mary Gianna, I hope I said that right after being here with you this little time. We will pray for you and for all the sisters.
Thank you very much, Christina. I appreciate all that you all do for the glory of God and for his kingdom and for vocations.
What a grace. Sister also mentioned spiritual motherhood, just like I said in my testimony, that I have to be a fruitful mother to all humanity. And it's true. Not only priests who feel like fathers too, but also those consecrated to the Lord who also feel like mothers, and they live that maternity openly to all of humanity, all that prayer. Sometimes you have to consider that maybe an entire convent is praying for you, and how those prayers are opening doors in your hearts and in your lives and in your difficulties too, because we all have them. Nobody is free from them, not even me. So know that you are sons and daughters of all those fertile spiritual mothers in the consecrated life. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you.